Yes, ma'am.
Okay, but why are there so few people here? Did you have a class just before this?
Ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I expect people will be joining soon. The thing is, I can't wait anymore. Today we'll be discussing pumping lemma for regular sets. Okay, it's a very interesting lemma and is also widely used and is one of the properties of regular sets. Now you have all studied regular sets in great detail. I'm sure all of you have by now acquired a thorough understanding of what are regular sets. Okay, why call them regular? Because they follow a particular regular pattern. Okay, and this pattern is very conveniently expressed in the form of a regular expression. You have seen all about regular expressions, and to identify or to accept these regular sets, we have a series of machines called finite state machines or finite automata. Okay, so you have all seen all this. Now we'll be looking at some of the properties of regular sets. Okay, and today in particular we'll be looking at pumping lemma, which is a very important concept. Now, some languages are not regular. So when is a language regular? When do we say that a language is regular? When it can be expressed in the form of a DFA or NFA or an epsilon NFA or a regular expression. And by now all of you are competent enough, you can interchange between all the four different ways of expressing this. Okay, given a DFA you can find a regular expression for it, given an NFA you can find a DFA for it, and so on and so forth. So you can interchange between all the four of these. But when is a language not regular? Okay, so when is a language not regular? When you cannot build a finite automata for it, or you cannot express it using a regular expression. Now, how do you prove that a language is not regular? Suppose you are not able to come up with the normal common sense answer would be we cannot create a finite automata for it. But can you prove that you cannot create a finite automata, or is it that well, maybe you have not looked at all possibilities. Okay, maybe there is a possible finite automata which has not occurred to us, so we are not able to do it. So is it possible to prove that a finite automata will not exist? That is, to decisively prove that a language is not regular, here we use this property of a pumping lemma. So let's take an example of a non-regular language. So we look at strings of the form 0 and 1n. I think we have already discussed before that this language is not regular. Okay, where we call it LEQ or something, where you have strings of the form uh, series of zeros followed by equal number of ones. Okay. Now, hypothesis is that this language is not regular, and our intuitive rationale, now since we have been working with finite automata and regular expressions for a long time, you know that it is not possible to create a finite automata for it, because a finite automata cannot keep a count for an arbitrary number. If it is only say 0, 2, 1, 2, okay, so two zeros followed by two ones, I'm sure all of you can immediately create a finite automata for it. Even if it is not 2 but 200 zeros followed by 200 ones, you can still create a finite automata for it. Maybe you cannot draw it on a piece of paper, but the automata can be created. Okay, but if it is an unknown number, n is unspecified, it can be any positive number, okay, or it can even be 0, then you cannot create a generic machine which will be able to recognize the strings of this language. Is this clear? So this you already realize because you have worked enough with regular languages, with finite automata, with regular expressions and so on. But can you prove it? How can you prove it? Okay, so a more formal way of justifying this hypothesis that L is not regular is by contradiction. Okay, suppose we assume that L is regular, we assume that the language is regular, then there should exist a DFA for it. So let's take a DFA. Usually when we take a DFA, by default we take the minimal DFA, okay, because the minimal DFA, as you have already seen, is the normal form. Okay, it will be same for everybody. If there is a language, there is only one minimal DFA for it. So let K be the number of states in that DFA. Okay, now let's consider a special word which is K number of zeros followed by K number of ones. Now, as per the definition of this language L, okay, this word or this string W should belong to the language. It should be accepted by this DFA for this language. Now remember, okay, now after this, so what is the string we have seen? K number of zeros followed by K number of ones. And what is K? K, remember, is the number of states in the DFA. Okay. So let this P0, P1 to Pk be the sequence of states that the DFA should have visited after consuming the first K symbols. How many states will a DFA visit, okay, when it has consumed K symbols? The first K zeros, how many states?
Ma'am, K plus 1 states.
Yes, K plus 1, remember that. Okay, it is not equal to K because we have started from 0. So P0 to Pk is actually K plus 1 states. This is very important. All of you, have you realized this? That we have visited K plus 1 number of states. But how many states, how many distinctly different states are there in the DFA?
Ma'am, K.
K number of states. So what does this tell you? This tells that when you have already visited K plus 1 states, there must be some state which we have visited more than once. There is at least one state which you have visited more than once. There could of course possibly be more than one. Okay, but at least one state, because you cannot find K plus 1 distinct states in the DFA. We have taken a DFA with K states, K different states, and we find that in just consuming the first 0 Ks, K number of zeros in the string 0K, 1K, we have to visit K plus 1 number of states. So that means some state has repeated. Is this clear to all of you? So there are only K states in the DFA. So at least one state has to repeat somewhere along the path. So here we apply what is the pigeonhole principle. I'm sure all of you know the pigeonhole principle. Have you studied it in DMS?
Ma'am, in discrete math, yes, ma'am, we studied it.
Yes, and it is one of the easiest principles to understand. Okay. Now, what is the number of holes? How many different states are there? K number of states are there, and there are K plus 1 pigeons. So at least one hole is going to contain more than one pigeon. Okay, so that means you have visited some state more than once. The moment you have some state repeating in this path, remember this P0 to Pk is the path which you have traversed in consuming the first 0 Ks of the string W. Up till here, all of you clear? Okay, so this is a path P0 to Pk in which some state is repeating. So what does it mean? It means there is a cycle in the path. Let this repeating state be Pi equal to Pj. Somewhere in this string, string P0 to Pk, there is some Pi and a Pj which are actually the same. So it's a repeating state. So what you can do now is, excuse me for a minute. So what you can do now is try to fool the DFA. Okay, the first time you visit this state PI, you pretend as if you are in PJ, and what you will do is you will continue in the path and you will reach the final state. Okay, so what you have done is you have accepted less than k number of zeros in the DFA. Okay, so if there is a loop, so how are you fooling the DFA? Now all of you convinced that there is a loop in this path from P0 to Pk? Are all of you convinced that there is a loop in this path from P0 to Pk because of the pigeonhole principle? Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. So what we are going to do is this loop, we are going to cut it out. Do you realize that? Now, since we have assumed that 0k, 1k is a member of the language L, so after identifying this 0k's, we should be able to read 1k and accept the string. That means reach a final state. Okay. So how are we going to fool the DFA? We are going to cut out this loop. By cutting out this loop, we'll be accepting less than k number of zeros. Is that clear? Okay, so we are accepting less than k number of zeros, and then we will accept k number of ones and still accept the string, which is actually fewer number of zeros than ones and does not belong to the language. So by contradiction, we have found some way of fooling the DFA and accepting strings which do not belong to the language. So that means this DFA is not representing that language. Okay, so that is the justification. You can say that any DFA which you create, okay, you can always find a string which is not part of the language but will be accepted by the DFA. Okay, so this is how you prove it, and this is basically the rationale behind the pumping lemma. So now let's go to the lemma and see what it says. Okay, so the DFA accepts a string with unequal number of zeros and ones, implying that the DFA is wrong. So now let's look at, so this is the rationale on which pumping lemma is built. Okay, so what is the pumping lemma for regular languages? It is, what is a pumping lemma? It's actually a property of all regular languages. Excuse me for a minute. So how is this pumping lemma used? It is a technique used to show that a given language is not regular. Okay, so this pumping lemma, now let's see what this pumping lemma says. Now if L is a regular language, then the pumping lemma says that there exists some constants n, okay, this n is very important, such that for every string w belonging to L, okay, if the size of the string is greater than or equal to n, okay, let's not worry about what this constant n is at the moment, then there exists a way to break this string into three parts, x, y, and z, such that these are some of the conditions which will govern how x and y can be broken. Okay, y should not be an empty string. Y has to be non-empty. Okay, x and y will be less than equal to n. Okay, they could the maximum value it can reach, the size of x and y, that is the first two parts of the string, is going to be n. If these two conditions are met, then for all k, all values of k, the strings of the form x, y to the power k, z will belong to L. So this is the statement of the pumping lemma. Look at the statement for a minute. I'll be back in just 1 minute. Okay, I'm sorry about the interruption. Now, so what does the pumping lemma say? That there exists some constant. Now, I think you must have got some idea of what this constant n represents. What does it represent? What do you think?
The maximal size of the string.
No, something else. Any other idea from anybody? It is not maximal size. You should have said it's a minimal size, right? It's greater than equal to n. Anybody has any idea about what this n might represent? Nobody can think of anything, considering the rationale we just discussed. And the simplest way to conceptualize n is to think of it as the number of states in the DFA. Okay, so what does it say? If there exists some constants n such that for every string w whose size is greater than n, then there exists a way to break w into 3 parts, x, y, and z. Now, what are these x, y, and z? Can anybody tell me now?
Ma'am, the substrings that get accepted at every state.
Remember, we are going to break the path into 3 parts. One of them is the loop. So x is the part before the loop, y is the part in the loop, and z is the part after the loop. Okay. So what it says is that the loop cannot be empty. Now x and y have to be less than equal to n. So maximum size of x and y could be n. Okay. Actually, z could also be empty. It doesn't matter if z is empty, but x and y have to be there. Y cannot be empty. X can also be empty. And for all k greater than equal to 0, if x and x, y, z is a member of L, then x, y, k. That means the loop part you are pumping as many times as you like. Okay, the string would still be accepted by the finite automata. Now let's look at this rationale with a diagram. And this property, so I think now you have realized why we call it a pumping lemma, because we are pumping this substring y as many times as we like. Okay, infinite number of times also if we like. Okay, it can be, and even 0 number of times. We could even remove it altogether and xz would still be a member of the language L. Okay, this property holds for all regular languages And this n is called the pumping lemma constant, but it does not necessarily have to be the number of states in the DFA. That is the easier way of thinking about it. Okay, so let's look at the proof of pumping lemma. If L is regular, it should have a DFA. Let n be the number of states of the DFA. Any string such that the size of the string is greater than equal to n. Remember, if the size is equal to n, then how many states will it visit? N plus 1.
Plus 1.
Okay. It has to visit n plus 1. That means any string whose path length is more than n should have the form W, that is A1 to AM. So AM are the states that we visit, okay, where m is greater than equal to n. The states traversed after reading the first n symbols will be P0 to Pn. Okay, first n symbols. This is n plus 1 number of states. These are n plus 1 P states, while there are only n DFA states. So at least one PI has to repeat, okay, by pigeonhole principle. And we should be able to break W as X, Y, and Z such that first part is X, second part is Y, and the third part is Z. Okay, and this is how it will look. So X, Y is the loop part, and this is Z. Okay, Y is the loop. So Pij implies the loop, and Z is from Pj to Pn, the final state. And since this string XYZ is accepted by the DFA, the last state has to be a final or accepting states. Okay, so now let's consider another string WK where this Y is pumped K number of times, where K is greater than equal to 0. So YK for K loops. So K number of times we go over it, we could even go over it 0 number of times. If we go over it 0 number of times, that means we are following the path from P0 to Pi to Pm directly. We are not going over the loop, but the string is still accepted. Okay. If we pump it K number of times, then it is still accepted. So if it is K equals to 0, DFA will reach the accepting state. If it is K greater than 0 also, the DFA will loop K number of times and finally reach the accept state PM for Z. In any case, this WK will be a member of L. Okay, so this diagram, please remember very clearly, this is the entire statement of the pumping lemma. Okay, so what is the statement of the pumping lemma? Let's just go over it once again. So there exists some constant n such that for every string WL such that size of L is greater than equal to n, okay, there exists a way to break W into 3 parts, X, Y, and Z, okay, where Y is not an empty string, X and Y are less than equal to n, and for all K greater than equal to 0, strings of the form X, Y, K, Z are going to be part of the language. This is what it says. Okay. And you have seen the proof. And I hope all of you are able to understand what is the pumping lemma. Now, this is already done. Okay. Now, what is the purpose of, what is the use, or what is the application of pumping lemma? Okay. Pumping lemma is typically used to prove that some language is not regular. Remember, we know how to prove a language is regular. That is, we construct a regular expression or a finite automata for it. But we really do not know how to prove a language is not regular. Okay. So that proof, if we want a proper mathematical proof, that can be given by the pumping lemma. So how to use the pumping lemma? Typically, you can think of it as a game playing scenario, okay, where there are two players. One is us and the other is an adversary who is trying to break our game. Okay, so given a language, we have some experience with regular languages, so we say that this language, say 0 and 1n, is not regular. It cannot be regular. Now the adversary will claim that the language is regular. So this should give an indication of what kind of proof we are aiming at. It is a proof by contradiction. Okay, so let the statement be wrong. Okay, we assume the opposite of this. All of you have studied proof by contradiction. I'm sure you have studied these various different proofs in discrete maths paper. Have you studied it, proofs by contradiction, before?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Okay. So what is the first thing you do when you are trying to prove something by contradiction? You assume that the opposite of the statement which is required to be proven, okay, is true. Okay. So this is the contradiction, and this adversary claims the contradiction. The adversary claims that the language is regular. So it is nothing but putting a proof by contradiction in a game playing scenario. Okay. It's a game theoretic format. When you study game theory in detail, you'll realize this is typical setup for a game theoretic situation. So the next step is we show that the adversary statement will lead to a contradiction, which implies that the original assumption cannot hold. Okay, so that is what the adversary is claiming is not true. So we win. That means what have we done? Why have we won? Because our claim that the particular language is not regular is actually true. So this is the very fundamental flow of any proof using pumping lemma. Okay. So how to use the pumping lemma? First of all, we claim that a particular language is not regular. The adversary claims that L is regular and also gives you a value for N as its pumping lemma constant. You remember N is the pumping lemma constant, very important. Okay. Then we, using N, we choose a string W. Okay. We are at freedom to choose any W we like, but the conditions of the pumping lemma have to be met such that the size of W should be greater than equal to N. Okay, it has to be greater than or equal to the given constant. The constant, remember, is given to us by the adversary. And using W as a template, you construct other words of the form X, Y, K, Z and show that at least for one such WK, okay, where you have pumped YK number of times, okay, this WK, this string cannot belong to the language. Okay, and this implies that we have successfully broken the pumping lemma for the language. Now, which should not be correct because pumping lemma holds for all regular languages and hence the adversary is wrong. Okay, now in this process we might have to try various values of K. Usually we start with K0. Remember, K1 is the string which we have assumed in the first place, and then we try with K2, K3, 4, etc. so on until we find a WK such that it does not belong to L. And when we can show that, since pumping lemma does not hold, therefore L cannot be regular. So that is the proof. That is the usual format of the proof. Now let's look at some possible proofs. Before that, the roles here are very clearly given. So what does the adversary do? He claims that L is regular. First of all, see, remember, you have declared that L is not regular. The adversary claims that L is regular and also provides an N. Okay. Now you construct a template string such that, remember, it has to be greater than or equal to N. The size of that string has to be greater than or equal to N. And then demonstrate to the adversary either through pumping up or pumping down. Okay, we'll see what is meant by pumping up or pumping down. That some string WK exists which does not belong to the language. Okay. And therefore, the language L cannot be regular because pumping lemma has to hold for all regular languages. Okay. So an example. So this is the example which we had started with 0n, 1n. Okay. So we call it LEQ because they are equal number of zeros and ones. with a binary string with equal number of ones and zeros. Yes. Anybody asking some question? You have something to say? I cannot hear what you are saying. Please be louder. Please speak closer to the mic. Who's speaking, please? If not, please mute your mic. Okay. So LEQ, let's say it's a binary string with equal number of zeros and ones. Okay. And you claim that since a finite automata cannot keep track of number of zeros seen or number of, remember this is not 0 and 1n. 0 and 1n could be one example or one possibility in LEQ. All 0 and 1n type of strings will belong to LEQ, but LEQ might contain strings of other types also. Okay, and you claim that this LEQ is not regular. Now let's see how you can prove that. Now by contradiction, remember this is the adversarial step. Okay, this is the step by your adversary. So by contradiction, assume that LEQ is regular. The pumping constant, the pumping lemma constant should exist. So let n be that constant. Okay, so assume that is also given to you by the adversary. Now this n can be anything. It need not necessarily be the number of states in the DFA. Okay, it's the adversary's choice, whatever the adversary wishes to give. Now, number of states in the DFA, that is one possibility which helps us to understand how pumping lemma works. Okay, but this n actually can be anything. Now consider the input 0 and 1n. Okay, because you are at freedom to choose W. Remember, you are choosing the string 0 and 1n. Okay, as per the definition of LEQ, it belongs to LEQ. Okay, because there are equal number of zeros and ones. But note that LEQ does not say anything about the structure of the string. It does not say that it has to begin with zeros and followed by equal number of ones. It can be any string with equal number of zeros and ones in any order. But 0 and 1n matches this template. Okay, so let's work with this now. Now by pumping lemma, you should be able to break XYZ W into three parts, XYZ, such that the loop part is not empty. Okay, there has to be a non-empty loop. XY should be less than equal to n, and for all k, this is the pumping part. Okay, so how do we break the string 0 and 1n? We break it into two equal parts. Okay, the zeros, let there be n number of zeros and then n number of ones. And because xy, according to the requirements of pumping lemma, note mod xy, that is size of xy, should be less than equal to n. Because xy should be less than equal to n, xy should contain only zeros. Okay, it has only zeros, and this is because y is non-empty. Remember, this implies that y has, that is the loop part, has positive number of zeros. Therefore x can contain how many, maximum how many number of zeros? N minus 1. X can contain maximum n minus 1 number of zeros. That means for the loop you are leaving at least 1 zero. And also all the n ones must be inside Z. Okay, so the last part of the string, the second half of the string consisting of ones, are in the substring Z. Okay, and therefore by the third requirement of the pumping lemma, all strings of the form x, yk, z should belong to the language. Okay, so let's take the first case of k equal to 0, that is xz. So xz now also should belong to the language, but you know that x can have maximum n minus 1 number of zeros. Okay, but z has at least n number of ones. Z has n number of ones. So you are getting a string xz which has fewer zeros than ones. Can you see that, all of you? Are you all convinced that xz,
Yes, sir.
when you remove y, because y is a non-empty string. Previously, you had started with equal number of zeros and ones, but you have removed y, which is among the zeros, okay, and has one or more number of zeros. So x has fewer than n number of zeros, okay, and the string xz therefore will have fewer zeros than ones, okay, because z is n number of ones. Therefore, x, y0, z does not belong to LEQ. It does not have equal number of zeros and ones, and this violates pumping lemma, and you have got a contradiction. Okay, so removing y is actually, it is referred to as pumping down. Okay, so reducing the size of the string. Another way is to show that if the number of zeros in y is arbitrarily pumped, say k2 or more than 2 number of times, then the number of zeros will exceed the number of ones. Okay, so that will be called pumping up, when we are increasing the number of traversals on the loop. Okay, so let's take an example. So that was one example for LEQ or L, 0 and 1n. Okay, so similarly you can do something similar with 0m, 1, 0m. Now can you create a finite automata for this kind of language? Is it possible? Try to think of a finite automata, or trying to think of a regular expression. Now, I think you must realize that this is not possible, because by the time you go to accept that 1, you have forgotten how many zeros you have seen. Okay, and then you are supposed to see exactly the same number of zeros. It is somewhat like 0 and 1n, only there's a 1 separating the number of zeros. So a stack here where you can save the number of zeros would be very handy. Okay, but a regular expression, a regular language does not allow you to have any kind of memory. Okay. So remember, regular languages, finite automata do not have any memory. So any arbitrary number you cannot remember. This previous example, I'm sure you can write the proof yourself, because it's exactly the similar pattern as the previous proof. Okay, now let's see some typical proofs using pumping lemmas. The claim is you have I number of zeros, you have strings of zeros, I number of zeros where I is a perfect square. Okay, so you could have 1 0, you could have 4 zeros, you could have 9 zeros, you could have 16 zeros. Okay, that is what kind of representation, what kind of coding is this? Have I discussed this coding in the previous semester when I was discussing codings? You remember binary coding? This kind of coding where you are using only one digit, okay, that is only zeros, we are not even using one. This is called unary coding, where you have only one symbol to code your numbers. Okay, so the length of the string is the number which you are coding. So this is unary coding for I, where I is a perfect square. So let's look at the proof. So by contradiction, let's assume that L is regular and pumping lemma should apply, and let n be the pumping lemma constant. So let's choose a string which has n square number of zeros, whose length is n square, perfect square, remember. Okay, so this string W therefore belongs to the language. So by pumping lemma, we can break this string whose length is n square, perfect square, into X, Y and Z, 3 parts, satisfying all the 3 rules. So by rules 1 and 2, Y has to have a length between 1 and n. Y has to be between 1 and n number of zeros. And by rule 3, any string of the form X, Y, K, Z is also in the language. Okay, so let's see if we can show that it's not going to be true. So let's take the case of k equals to 0. So for x, y0k, that is xz, okay, because 0 number of y's, the number of zeros in it, that is the length of the string, would be the length of the string XYZ, which is W. What is the length of the string XYZ?
Ma'am, greater than or equal to n.
What is the length of the string W?
Greater than or equal to n, ma'am.
I think you can give me a better answer than that. Now look at this. Okay, I don't have the. Follow my cursor. What does this say? W is equal to n square number of zeros. So length of the
Okay,
string
n
W
square,
is
n
n
square,
square.
n square.
N square, yes. Okay, so the length of the string XYZ is n square. Okay, and if you remove y, which is non-empty, remember, so that is minus a certain number of zeros which are there in y. So the length of this string XY0Z, yes?
Ma'am, we're having classes from 4:30.
Okay, okay, let's complete this proof. The next proof we will finish in the next class. So let's be quick. We have 1 minute left. Okay, so this length of the string XY0Z is going to be between n square minus n and n square minus 1. Why this 1 and n? Quickly. This n and 1 is the range. 1 to n is the range that the length of y can take. Okay, so the length of y will be between 1 and n. Okay, so we have removed that y. So length of xz now is going to be n square minus n to n square minus 1. It is going to range in this range. It will be somewhere between this. And you can see that none of these are perfect squares. The next less perfect square, the smaller perfect square would be n minus 1 whole square. N square minus n is strictly greater than n minus 1 whole square. Okay, and n square minus 1 is also strictly less than n square. So the length of this string xz with y removed is going to lie strictly between two squares. Can you see that? Therefore, it cannot be square in any way. Okay. Therefore, this cannot belong to L. Okay. But to complete the proof, we have to show that n has to be greater than 1. Now, if it is n greater than 1, what we have done here is, in the previous case, is pumping down. That is, we have removed y. Now, if n is greater than, if n is equal to 1, what you can do is you can pump up. You can use k equals to 2. And you can again show that the length will lie exactly between n square and n plus 1 square. Okay, that is between two squared numbers. So therefore, it cannot belong to L. Okay, actually the second part is more generic because it can apply to any value of n. Okay, so this shows us that it cannot be a perfect square. I think since you have a class, we will stop here. This is about the pumping lemma. I am going to, okay, very important instruction which I forgot to give. That is, your tests will be on Thursday. Pumping lemma is not going to be part of that test. It will be till Moore and Mealy machine. CR, who is your CR? Abhishek, is he here? If not, I'll contact him and let him know. Your tests will be on the Moodle platform and all of you are supposed to enroll yourself in the Moodle for the course. The course code I will send to you via your CR and you must do it by tomorrow, all of you. Please put this
Ma'am, the
notice in
enrollment
your
key you'll send it to
class
us.
notice board. Yes, anybody had any question?
Ma'am, I was asking you'll send the enrollment key to us, ma'am, because I saw the
Yes,
course.
enrollment key, you can take it down. It is TOC 2021. TOC 2021, small letters.
Okay, ma'am.
Okay. So all of you please enroll on the Moodle platform for this course 402 and your test will be on the Moodle platform on Thursday at the scheduled time, that is 4:30. Now you may leave for the next class and I will give this notice via your CR. You can get it in your WhatsApp group also.
Ma'am,
Thank
this
you.
Thursday.
Yes.
Ma'am, this Thursday, that means day after tomorrow?
The test is on Thursday at your scheduled class time.
This week or the next week?
Yes, this week, according to you, you have seen the academic calendar, haven't you seen that? Assessment test will be this week.
Yes. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, and the portion is till Moore and Mealy machines. Pumping lemma is not there, so finite till finite automata and regular expressions. Thank you. You may leave now, all of you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.